The rain came down in sharp sheets, slashing against the windows as if the storm itself wanted to be heard. Inside the stately cold house, perched on the edge of a small coastal town, Emma's 21st birthday was far from celebratory. She hadn't expected much. Her adoptive parents, Henry and Laura Miles, weren't exactly the affectionate type. But the silence at breakfast, the sidelong glances, the awkward stiffness in their movements, all of it felt wrong. By afternoon, Henry called her into the living room, his face tight with an unfamiliar seriousness. Laura hovered at the edge of the room, her arms folded across her chest like a barrier. "Sit down," Henry said, his voice grating and formal, the same tone he used to reprimand her for the smallest mistakes as a child. Emma obeyed, her hands fidgeting in her lap, her nerves prickling with unease. "You're old enough now," Laura said flatly, her gaze fixed on a spot above Emma's shoulder, "to know the truth and to make your own way." Emma blinked, confusion knotting her thoughts. Before she could ask what Laura meant, Henry dropped the bombshell. "You were adopted." His words were stripped of warmth, delivered with the same dispassionate precision he used to dictate office memos. "We took you in when you were 3. Your birth mother, well, she wasn't fit to raise you." The words hit Emma like ice water, shocking but not entirely unexpected. She had never felt truly wanted here, her childhood marked by indifference and calculated civility. But even as she tried to process the revelation, her mind was already catching on the way Henry had phrased it. "We did what we could," Henry continued, his eyes sliding away from hers. "But now, it's time you find your own path." He reached under the couch and produced a small, battered duffel bag, shoving it toward her as if it were a burden he couldn't wait to discard. "There's some money in there, enough for a few nights at a boarding house. After that, you're on your own." Emma stared at the duffel bag, her hands frozen at her sides. Everything about this felt cold, calculated. And then it clicked. This wasn't just a dismissal. It was a severance. "Happy birthday," Laura added, her voice devoid of sentiment. Emma looked up, her chest tight, her voice a whisper. "Thank you." But the gratitude was hollow, a placeholder for the rage simmering beneath her skin. They had no idea she already knew. They had no idea she had found the letter. The boarding house Emma found was a crumbling relic wedged between 2 dilapidated buildings on the edge of town. Its exterior paint was chipped and flaking, the windows clouded with grime that never seemed to wash away. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and stale coffee, the kind of place where broken dreams clung to the wallpaper like a second layer of dust. Emma paid the landlady, a hunched woman with nicotine-stained fingers and a gaze as sharp as broken glass, for a single room with her last crumpled bills. The room itself was barely larger than a closet. Its narrow bed sagged in the middle, and the radiator rattled like it was constantly trying to catch its breath. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the battered duffel bag Henry had handed her like a severed lifeline. Inside were 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the remainder of the money, a pathetic sum that barely covered the rent for a week. It was clear her parents had intended this to be a clean break. They'd cut her off with surgical precision, leaving her to rot in a place they would never dare set foot in. But Emma refused to break down. She refused to let the bitterness consume her. Days bled together in a haze of hunger and exhaustion. The only meal she could afford was a packet of instant noodles stretched across 2 days. She wandered the town during daylight, scouring for jobs, her stomach gnawing at her from the inside out. But the coastal town was small, with opportunities even smaller. Most places wouldn't hire her without references. References Henry and Laura would never provide. Nights were worse. She slept with her back against the door, the muffled sounds of arguing tenants and creaking floorboards keeping her from finding any real rest. But still, she kept going. Every morning she made her way to the public library, the one place that felt safe, a place where she could focus on something other than her own hunger. because while her stomach ached and her limbs felt heavy, her mind burned with a singular purpose: uncovering the truth about Dr. Sarah Hart. The public library became Emma's refuge, a place where silence wasn't hostile, just indifferent. She spent hours hunched over dimly lit desks, the scent of aged paper and dust becoming almost comforting. The librarian, a gray-haired woman with soft eyes named Mrs. Carter, seemed to sense Emma's desperation. She allowed Emma to linger well past closing hours, sometimes leaving the back door unlocked if Emma needed extra time. Emma devoured information, her fingers scrolling through ancient microfilm machines and outdated computers as if her life depended on it. Because it did. It had been years since she first found the letter. She had been cleaning Henry's office, his forbidden zone, when she stumbled across it, hidden beneath layers of tax papers and old contracts. The letter, addressed to a Dr. Sarah Hart, bore an institutional seal she didn't recognize, but what shook her was the attached document, a birth certificate listing Dr. Hart as her mother. No father was named. Emma remembered how her hands had trembled, the paper's edge slicing her thumb as she read and reread the words. She kept the letter hidden in her closet, buried under a stack of forgotten novels, too afraid to confront Henry about it. Now, the fragments of that discovery drove her forward with an almost feverish desperation. Researching Sarah Hart proved challenging. Her name surfaced in medical journals from over 2 decades ago. Her work focused on experimental neurological research aimed at treating severe trauma and memory disorders. But then, everything stopped. The articles cut off abruptly, with nothing but a void where her career should have continued. As Emma dug deeper, the silence around Dr. Hart's name began to feel deliberate, suppressed, buried. Then she found it. A single article from a local newspaper archived on a microfilm reel dated 18 years ago. The headline read, "Acclaimed neurologist Dr. Sarah Hart committed amidst allegations of professional misconduct." Emma's heart pounded as she read on. Dr. Hart had been institutionalized after accusing Callahan Neuro Research Institute, a powerful medical research foundation, of conducting unethical human trials. The article claimed she had become delusional and unstable, her accusations dismissed as paranoid ravings. The final line chilled Emma to the core. Institutionalized indefinitely at Clearwater Psychiatric Institute. Emma printed the article and slipped it into her duffel bag, her hands trembling. The truth was bigger and darker than she had imagined. The very institution that had committed her mother was run by the same people Sarah Hart had tried to expose. And somehow, Henry Miles had been connected to it all. Emma's hunger, exhaustion, and isolation melted into something sharper: determination. Her mother hadn't been unfit, she had been silenced. And Emma was going to uncover why. The Clearwater Psychiatric Institute sat like a forgotten fortress on the edge of a dense forest, its stone walls veined with moss and its windows smeared with decades of neglect. Emma stared at the imposing building from across the cracked parking lot, her nerves frayed but her resolve unbroken. She had spent days gathering scraps of information, tracing every clue back to this place, and now, standing in the chilly morning air, she felt the weight of her mother's lost years press against her shoulders. She wasn't here to plead for answers. She was here to seize them. Emma had rehearsed her story 100 times. As she stepped through the creaking double doors, she introduced herself as a freelance medical researcher conducting a study on long-term psychiatric care. Her cheap blazer and hastily printed ID badge were just convincing enough to buy her access past the disinterested receptionist. It helped that the woman looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with the kind of darkness that only comes from too many double shifts and too little pay. Emma's breath hitched as she walked down the dimly lit corridor, her footsteps echoing against tile floors that hadn't been polished in years. The air inside was cold and sterile, saturated with the faint scent of disinfectant and something sourer lurking beneath. Emma kept her head down, nodding politely to the occasional nurse or orderly, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. According to the sparse information she had dug up, Dr. Sarah Hart had been transferred to Clearwater under emergency conditions, following her accusations against the Callahan Neuro Research Institute. Emma suspected those emergency conditions were little more than a fabricated excuse to silence her mother once and for all. Emma's fake credentials granted her access to the patient files room, a disorganized labyrinth of rusting filing cabinets and computer monitors that flickered unpredictably. Her fingers trembled as she rifled through stacks of yellowed folders, her eyes straining to read the scrawled handwriting and faded ink. Most of the files were mundane: patient histories, medication records, therapy notes. But eventually she found it. A thick file labeled Dr. Sarah Hart, high-risk patient. Her mother's file was filled with reports painting her as paranoid and violent, obsessed with what the institution's doctors labeled as delusional theories of systemic abuse. But the more Emma read, the clearer it became that these were fabrications. According to the records, Sarah Hart had been subjected to intensive involuntary treatments designed to modify her behavior. Methods listed included chemical sedation, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation. None of it sounded like therapy, it sounded like punishment. Even worse, there were notes from Dr. Victor Callahan himself, the man her mother had once accused. His comments were cold, clinical. Subject remains combative and non-compliant. Recommend continuation of sedative regimen and isolation protocols. Emma's hands shook as she copied the documents onto a flash drive, her mind reeling from the implications. This wasn't just about silencing her mother, it was about erasing her. Emma stuffed the flash drive into her pocket, her pulse racing as she carefully returned the files to their disorganized piles. As she exited the records room, she realized she had more than just suspicion now. She had proof, and with it, a chance to finally uncover the truth and restore her mother's shattered reputation. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous her path became, because someone was still keeping watch, and they wouldn't let her walk away unscathed. Emma stumbled out of the Clearwater Psychiatric Institute, her mind buzzing with the weight of what she had just discovered. The flash drive in her pocket felt heavy, like a live wire burning through her jacket. Panic clawed at her chest, but desperation kept her steady. She needed help, someone who knew how to take down a monstrous institution like Callahan Neuro Research Institute. Her first and only lead was Lydia Brooks, a journalist whose name kept surfacing in old articles related to medical corruption and whistleblower cases. Lydia had been blacklisted from mainstream media years ago for refusing to drop a story about unethical research practices. If anyone could help Emma, it was her. Tracking Lydia down proved difficult. Her articles were buried, her name scrubbed from the major publications where she had once thrived. Emma finally found a single post from a message board, an encrypted forum dedicated to uncovering corporate conspiracies. The message read, "For those who seek the truth, find me where the city meets the shadows." After 2 nights of searching, Emma found her. Lydia lived in a cramped, cluttered apartment above a shuttered print shop in the rougher part of town. The smell of cigarette smoke and stale coffee lingered in the air as Emma knocked on the door, her knuckles trembling against the cracked paint. Lydia opened the door with narrowed eyes, her curly hair pulled into a loose bun, suspicion etched into every line of her face. "If you're selling something, I'm not interested," she said, her voice rough but sharp. "I'm not selling anything, I'm here because of Sarah Hart," Emma blurted, her words tripping over each other. Lydia's expression shifted, curiosity overtaking her wariness. She stepped aside, gesturing for Emma to enter. Inside, the apartment was chaos, a maze of notebooks, files, and scribbled notes strewn across every available surface. Emma glanced around, her gaze catching on a bulletin board pinned with newspaper clippings and photos connected by frayed red strings. It looked like something out of a crime show, but here it was all too real. "Sarah Hart," Lydia repeated, her tone cautious but intrigued. "Why do you care?" "She's my mother," Emma replied, her voice cracking, "and I have proof she was silenced by Callahan Neuro Research Institute." Lydia's eyes widened, and then her lips curled into a grim smile. "Well then," she said, gesturing to the cluttered desk piled high with documents, "looks like you've come to the right place." Emma had found her ally, and for the first time since she had been thrown out of her childhood home, she didn't feel completely alone. Days blurred into nights as Emma and Lydia dove headfirst into the tangled web of corruption surrounding Callahan Neuro Research Institute. Lydia's apartment became their war room, its cluttered corners now swallowed by open laptops, hastily scribbled notes, and piles of old medical files. Lydia worked with a frenetic energy, her fingers flying over keyboards as she hacked into restricted databases and scoured obscure archives for evidence. Emma contributed what she could, sorting through documents and cross-referencing names, but her real asset was the flash drive she'd stolen from Clearwater Psychiatric Institute. It held damning proof that her mother, Dr. Sarah Hart, had not only been institutionalized under false pretenses, but tortured and manipulated to force her silence. The files on the flash drive were horrifying in their detail: reports of chemical sedation, isolation therapy, and psychological manipulation, all administered under the guise of treatment. But the most chilling documents were the ones detailing Dr. Hart's own reports, testimonies she had tried to submit to medical ethics boards before her commitment. Her notes described the unethical human trials conducted at Callahan Neuro Research Institute, where patients were subjected to forced experimental procedures under the direction of Dr. Victor Callahan himself. Sarah had uncovered experiments involving memory suppression and personality modification, allegedly aimed at treating severe mental illnesses, but in reality used to test control methods on vulnerable patients. Many of those patients were women labeled as inconvenient by society, addicts, abused spouses, and even whistleblowers who had proven too difficult to silence through conventional means. Emma's stomach twisted as she read through her mother's meticulous documentation, each page brimming with names and dates, protocols and violations. Sarah Hart had been trying to expose Callahan Neuro Research Institute's abuses for years before they finally deemed her a threat and had her committed. And worse, Henry Miles, Emma's adoptive father, had played a critical role in the cover-up. His name appeared in memos, signing off on decisions to transfer certain patients to Clearwater under fabricated diagnoses. His influence had extended deep into the medical board, ensuring that Sarah's complaints were discredited before they even reached a hearing. "What did you say your adoptive father does?" Lydia asked one night, her voice strained as she scrolled through yet another incriminating document. He's an executive at some pharmaceutical company. Miles & Co., Emma replied, her throat tight. Lydia's eyes narrowed. Miles & Co. is one of Callahan's largest corporate donors. They've been funneling money into the institute for over a decade. Your father wasn't just involved, he was helping fund the entire operation. The revelation hit Emma like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just about silencing Sarah, it was about preserving a network of influence and profit built on the suffering of others. Her whole life had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion meant to keep her ignorant and compliant. Her father's motives for adopting her became grotesquely clear. She was never meant to find the truth, but now that she had, there was no going back. "We have enough to expose them," Emma said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Everything they did to my mother, to those patients, we can bring it all crashing down." Lydia looked at her, a fire burning in her eyes. Then let's do it. Let's make sure the whole world knows. Emma stood in the center of the crowded park, her fists clenched so tightly that her nails bit into her palms. She had chosen the location deliberately, a bustling open space where prying eyes and innocent bystanders would force her adoptive father to keep his composure. Henry Miles arrived precisely on time, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete path as he approached. He looked the same as ever, immaculately dressed, his expression calculatedly composed, but the coldness in his gaze, the mask of fatherly concern he wore, had finally cracked. Emma could see it now for what it truly was: control. "I expected something like this from you," Henry said, his voice low and clipped. "Dramatics were always your specialty." Emma fought the urge to scream at him. Instead, she held her ground, her eyes locked on his with a calmness she hadn't felt before. "This isn't about dramatics, Henry. It's about the truth. I know what you did to my mother, to Sarah Hart, and I know why." Henry's expression flickered, just a heartbeat of panic before his face settled into a stern, disapproving frown. "Emma, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Whatever nonsense you think you've uncovered is nothing more than the delusions of a mentally unstable woman." "Don't patronize me," Emma snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "I've seen the files. I've read the reports. You were part of everything. Callahan's experiments, the false reports, silencing anyone who got too close. And you adopted me to cover your tracks, didn't you? To make sure no one ever asked questions about what really happened to her." Henry's shoulders stiffened, the veneer of control slipping further. "You don't understand the magnitude of what you're doing, Emma. You're playing with forces beyond your comprehension. If you continue down this path, you'll destroy yourself." "No," Emma said, her voice steady, each word laced with conviction. "The only thing that's getting destroyed is your empire. I've already sent everything I found to people who will make sure the world knows what you did." For the first time, real fear flickered in Henry's eyes. Emma turned and walked away, her steps firm and unyielding. She didn't need to see his reaction. She had won the only battle that mattered. Emma's fingers trembled as she hit the final send button, her message and all the evidence attached to it firing off into the digital void. Copies of her mother's reports, Callahan's internal memos, patient logs and video files documenting the cruel experiments were now in the hands of investigative journalists, whistleblower platforms, and advocacy organizations dedicated to exposing corruption. She and Lydia worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and a relentless hunger for justice. By dawn, the story was everywhere. Headlines splashed across social media, forums buzzing with outrage, and reputable journalists demanding investigations into Callahan Neuro Research Institute. Emma's breath caught as she watched the news unfold, her name deliberately left out of the reports. It was safer that way, for now. But the victory felt hollow until Emma knew her mother was free. Days later, she and Lydia drove back to Clearwater Psychiatric Institute, their arrival no longer concealed under false pretenses. The facility's administration had crumbled under the weight of the scandal, with high-ranking officials resigning or being placed on immediate leave. Emma's chest tightened with anticipation as she marched down the same dimly lit corridors, this time with Lydia at her side. A familiar figure waited for them, her form slumped in a wheelchair by the window. Dr. Sarah Hart looked thinner, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes, Emma's eyes, held a clarity and warmth that had once been stripped away. Emma dropped to her knees beside her mother, tears streaming down her face as she took Sarah's frail hands into her own. "They told me you were gone," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse but unmistakably her own. "That you'd been taken from me forever." "I'm here," Emma choked out, her voice thick with emotion. "And you're coming home." Their reunion was brief but powerful, the culmination of years of silence, shattered by Emma's determination. Lydia made arrangements for Sarah's transfer to a legitimate medical facility where she could receive proper care. And as Sarah was wheeled away, the smile she gave Emma was one of pure, unfiltered love. For the first time since her adoptive parents had abandoned her, Emma felt whole. The nightmare that had haunted her mother's life was finally unraveling, and Emma had been the one to pull the thread. But their journey wasn't over. There were others like Sarah, trapped by the same cruelty and corruption. Emma and Lydia vowed to continue their work, to tear down the walls built by greed and injustice. They had started a fire, and Emma would see it burn until nothing but truth remained. 6 months had passed since the scandal broke, but the echoes of Emma's fight against the Callahan Neuro Research Institute were still rippling through the world. The institute had been dismantled, its board members arrested or forced to resign under a barrage of lawsuits and criminal charges. Dr. Victor Callahan had gone into hiding, his whereabouts unknown. Henry Miles was among those indicted, his influence shattered beyond repair. The media dubbed it the Heart Conspiracy, but to Emma, it was something far simpler: redemption. Emma had moved into Lydia's cramped but welcoming apartment, the walls now lined with whiteboards and case files from other whistleblowers seeking justice. What started as Emma's personal quest to save her mother had evolved into a full-fledged mission to expose corruption and exploitation. Lydia had managed to rebuild her journalistic career, albeit from the fringes, and Emma became her partner in uncovering hidden truths. Together they formed the Phoenix Network, a small but growing advocacy group dedicated to fighting institutional abuse and giving voice to the silenced. As for Sarah, her recovery was slow but promising. She had been moved to a rehabilitation center where her treatment was ethical, voluntary, and centered around healing, not suppression. Emma visited her every weekend, their bond growing stronger with each conversation. Sarah's laughter was still hesitant, her voice rough from years of misuse, but her eyes shone with pride each time Emma spoke of their ongoing work. On one quiet evening, as Emma and Lydia sifted through new evidence from an anonymous whistleblower, Emma glanced at the bulletin board that had once been a chaotic mess of conspiracy theories. Now, it was a testament to their victories. "We're making a difference," she whispered, her gaze fixed on a photograph of her mother smiling on her last visit. Lydia grinned, her fingers already tapping away at the keyboard. "We're just getting started." The story of Emma Miles teaches us a powerful lesson about resilience, truth, and the strength of unwavering determination. Faced with betrayal and abandonment by her adoptive parents, Emma could have given up, defeated by isolation and despair. Instead, she chose to pursue the truth, fueled by love and loyalty to her biological mother, Dr. Sarah Hart. Her journey reveals that justice often requires courage, sacrifice, and relentless effort. Emma's fight against the powerful Callahan Neuro Research Institute highlights the importance of standing up against corruption, no matter how deeply rooted or intimidating it may seem. Through her partnership with Lydia, Emma shows us that unity and collaboration can amplify voices that would otherwise be silenced. It is a reminder that even the most influential and oppressive systems can be dismantled when confronted with truth and resilience. Moreover, the story illustrates the transformative power of empathy. Emma's quest wasn't just about revenge. It was about healing, redemption, and giving her mother the freedom she was unjustly denied. By channeling her pain into purpose, Emma found her true strength. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. When you fight for justice, even against overwhelming odds, the truth will prevail.